She called him Papa, the way children call a name that has always been there. It was a Tuesday morning in September, and the courtroom was quiet in the way that courtrooms are quiet when something specific and irreversible is about to happen. The hearing had been proceeding for 42 minutes. The attorney for the petitioner had submitted 3 exhibits. The district attorney's office had submitted 2. The judge had asked 4 questions, each of which had been answered in the order she asked them. And then the judge had looked at the child and had said in the careful, deliberate way of a judge who understands that a 6-year-old's account requires a specific kind of receiving, "Is there someone in this room you would like to be near?" The child, Amara Jean Whitfield, 6 years old, in a green dress that her grandmother had pressed that morning with the iron from the closet shelf, had pointed across the room. She had said Papa. The man she had pointed to was 67 years old. His name was Cornelius James Whitfield. He had been a 6th-grade science teacher for 31 years in the Greenwood, Mississippi School District, had retired the previous June, and had been picking up his granddaughter from the Pinehurst Elementary School dismissal line every Tuesday and Thursday for the 14 months since his daughter had started her night nursing program and needed someone to cover the afternoon pickup. He had a photograph of himself and Amara at her kindergarten graduation in his wallet, which he had been carrying since May. On the Tuesday that Officer Raymond Stokes had stopped his car 3 blocks from the school, the photograph had been in his wallet. The documentation had been on his phone. The emergency contact designation had been in the school's system since September of the previous year. None of it had prevented the handcuffs. Cornelius Whitfield had grown up in Greenwood, the 3rd of 5 children, born to a woman named Lottie Mae Whitfield, who had cleaned houses and done laundry for white families on the north side of town for 37 years. And a man named Earl Whitfield, who had worked the cotton fields for 14 years. Then the compress for 11, and had died at 52 of the kind of slow lung injury that a compress worker in 1978 Mississippi died of, when there was no one whose job it was to count what the cotton dust was costing. Earl Whitfield had been born in 1926 in a sharecropper's cabin 9 miles east of Greenwood. He had worked the same fields his father had worked, the same fields his father's father had worked, the unbroken chain of agricultural labor that had shaped the Delta since long before the Whitfields had names that a county office would recognize. He had been, Lottie Mae had told Cornelius, a man who believed in the specific functional version of dignity, not the kind that required recognition from outside, but the kind that comes from doing your work at the highest quality available to you, and from protecting the people in your charge. He had believed that what you could not change, you survived with your character intact. He had believed that what you could change, you changed. He had been, by all accounts of the people who had known him on the east side of Greenwood, a man who was slow to speak and precise when he did. He had told Cornelius when Cornelius was 10, "I want you to go further than I went, not because where I am is wrong, because the work I have done was for the purpose of you going further. That is the purpose. Do not mistake the purpose." Cornelius had said, "Where do you want me to go?" Earl had said, "Wherever the education takes you. That is where I want you to go." He had been a large man, slow to speak, with hands that had the specific, permanent quality of hands that have been used at physical work since childhood. Not rough exactly, but dense, shaped by what they had done. He had married Lottie Mae Johnson in 1951, and had moved them both to Greenwood proper, to a house on the east side, because he had understood that the compress paid more than the fields, and that the compress was where the work was going. And he had made the decision that a man makes when he sees the direction of the available opportunity and moves toward it, even though the opportunity itself is limited in ways he cannot change. He had worked the compress for 11 years. The compress was where the cotton came to be baled and stored before shipping. The air in a compress was cotton air, fine, white, pervasive, the kind of particulate that settles into the lungs in ways that the lungs were not designed to accommodate. The men who worked the compress knew this in the empirical way of men who cough through December and whose cough is different in February than it was in November. They did not have the medical vocabulary for it, The medical vocabulary existed, but it was not offered to them because the people with the medical vocabulary worked in offices that were not connected to the problem of what the compress air was doing to the compress workers. The disconnect was not accidental. Earl Whitfield had coughed through the winter. He had kept working. He had worked because stopping was not an option that paid. He had died in October of 1978. Cornelius had been 18 years old. He had been a month into his first semester at Mississippi Valley State University on an academic scholarship that he had earned in the specific, unsurprising way of a boy who grows up in a house where the serious thing is taken seriously. His mother had made sure there were books. His teachers had made sure there were standards, and Cornelius had made sure there was the work. He had the specific, focused quality of a student who understands that the scholarship is the door, and the door must be earned, and who earns it, without drama, because the earning is itself the point. He had come home for the funeral. The house had been full of people. The specific fullness of a black family's grief in a small Mississippi city. The church ladies with the food. The men from the compress in their good clothes standing outside. Because there was not enough room inside the children running in the way that children run at funerals, because they do not yet know how to be still in the presence of death. Cornelius had stood at the side of his father's casket, and had looked at his father's hands, and had thought these hands built what we have. Everything that is ours came through these hands. He had stood there for a long time. His mother, Lottie Mae, had found him there. She had said without preface, "You go back." He had said, "Mama." She had said your father worked every day of his working life so that you could go. You go back. That is what the going back is for. He had gone back. He had gone home for the funeral and had come back. Lottie Mae Whitfield had kept working after Earl died. She had worked the North Side houses for another 9 years, until Cornelius had been established at Carver long enough to make sure she did not need to anymore. In those 9 years she had done what she had always done. She had cleaned the houses of families that she knew, and had done it with the specific, complete professionalism of a woman who understood that the work itself was not demeaning, that the demeaning was in the conditions and the compensation and the invisibility, and that none of those things had anything to do with the quality of the work she brought to it. She had maintained the practice of writing to Cornelius once a month, because phone calls were expensive and letters were what you did when you wanted to say something that you wanted the person to read twice. The letters were 1 page each, written in her careful, self-taught hand news from the family news. From the East Side, one piece of advice she had thought about before writing. The sentence she closed every letter with: "You are doing what your father paid for. Do not waste it." He had kept every letter. They were in a shoebox in the closet of the second bedroom on Willow Street. He had not wasted it. She had died in 1994, the year Naomi was 4 years old. She had died in the house on the East Side, in the bedroom where she had slept for 42 years with Cornelius, and his 2 brothers and 2 sisters in the house, and the neighbors coming through the way that neighbors come in the neighborhoods, where people have been there long enough to know each other across generations. She had been 71 years old. Cornelius had sat with her the night before she died, and had held her hand and had not said anything because she had told him when he was in graduate school that she did not want the kind of conversation at the end that people have because they feel they are supposed to. She had said, when the time comes, just be there. That is enough. He had been there. She had died at 4 in the morning. He had called his brother James at 4:15. He had thought she spent 37 years cleaning other people's houses. She came home every evening and cooked and took care of what was hers. She put 5 children through school. She told me to go back. I went back. This is what it was for. He had held that accounting for 29 years. He had graduated in 1982 with a degree in biology and a secondary education certification, and a specific already formed idea about what teaching was for. It was for the children who were going to grow up in the same town where they had been born, and who were going to need to understand the world they were growing up in well enough to decide what to do about it. At Mississippi Valley State, he had studied under a man named Dr. Josephus Hale, who taught biology, and who had the specific demanding quality of a teacher who does not accept the incomplete answer and who makes the incompleteness visible in the way that exposes it without humiliating the student. Dr. Hale had said on the first day of Cornelius's first class, "Science is the practice of changing your mind when the evidence requires it. It is the only discipline where being wrong is the process and not the failure. If you do not know how to be wrong correctly, you do not know how to do science." He had said, "This means that your opinion does not count. Your analysis counts. Your evidence counts. Your reasoning counts. But what you think the answer should be before you have the evidence does not count. The evidence counts." Cornelius had written that down. He had looked at it for 30 years. He had thought, "I want to be the person who teaches children how to be wrong correctly." He had also thought, "I want to be the person who teaches children what it means when an analysis is made before the evidence is available, when the conclusion precedes the inquiry, when someone decides what is true before they have looked at what is there." Dr. Hale had called that bad science. In his classroom for 31 years, Cornelius had taught it as the error that produces all other errors, the error of the hypothesis held too tight, the assessment formed before the observation, the conclusion sought rather than followed. He had taught it as a scientific failure. He had believed and had never said explicitly in his classroom, but had demonstrated by example in every lesson that it was also every other kind of failure. He had come back to Greenwood. He had taken the position at Carver Middle School, which had been the black school in the county before integration, and which had after integration become the school that served the part of town where most of the black families still lived, because neighborhoods integrate more slowly than school systems do, and sometimes not at all. He had taught 6th grade science for 31 years. He had taught the scientific method which his students had often received as an abstract procedure and which he had always presented as a practical tool. You form a hypothesis, you test it, and then this was the part that took the most teaching. You go where the evidence leads, whether or not that is where you expected to go. The evidence leads where it leads. Your job is to follow. He had developed over 31 years a specific way of teaching this part. He would pose a question that the students were confident they knew the answer to before they tested it. He might ask which is heavier, a pound of cotton or a pound of iron, and the students would answer iron, and he would say, "Set up the test." And they would set up the test, and they would find that the scale balanced because a pound is a pound regardless of material. And then he would say, "Your hypothesis was wrong. What do you do with that?" The students would say, "Change the hypothesis." He would say, "Yes. And what does changing the hypothesis mean about you?" The students would not know how to answer. He would say, "It means you are doing science correctly." Being wrong in the presence of evidence is not a failure. It is the beginning of knowing something true. He had said this sentence in various forms to 31 years of 6th graders. He had also, over 31 years, developed the specific understanding that some students in his classroom were carrying things that had nothing to do with science and that were going to shape whether they were able to receive what he was teaching. He had learned to read this in the first 2 weeks of each school year, which students came in already exhausted, already wearing the specific weight of a home situation or a neighborhood situation, or a prior year teacher who had told them something permanent and wrong about their potential. He had learned that those students needed something before they could learn the scientific method. They needed to be in a room where what they formed as a hypothesis was taken seriously by the person asking for it. He had built his classroom to be that room. He had over 31 years watched students from the south part of Greenwood, from the families who did what his mother had done and what his father had done, sit in his classroom and understand, in the specific physical way of understanding that cannot be faked, that they were capable of the rigorous thing. That forming a hypothesis and testing it and following the evidence was something they could do. That being wrong in the presence of evidence was the beginning of knowing something true and not the confirmation of what someone had already decided about them. He had been doing this for 31 years. He had retired in June. His last day had been a Friday in June, and the school had held the small ceremony that schools hold for retiring teachers. The colleagues in the faculty room, the principal's remarks. The card signed by the current year's students and by former students who had heard and who had sent their own notes. And Cornelius had stood in the faculty room and had thought 31 years. 300 and some students per year. He had done the number once when he was in his 25th year and had arrived at the estimate that he had taught approximately 5,000 students in 25 years. He had not made a list. He could not have named them all. But he knew that some of them were still in Greenwood doing the specific work of people who had grown up in the place and had stayed, and that some of them had gone where the evidence had taken them to colleges and cities and careers that Cornelius had no information about, except the occasional news from someone who had heard, and that all of them had been in his classroom for 1 year and had encountered at least once the sentence, "You go where the evidence leads," whether or not that is where you expected to go. He had thought, I do not know which of them kept it. He had thought some of them kept it. That is enough. His last class had been a Friday morning in June, the final period before the school's summer break. 22 sixth graders who were in the last hours of their last day and who were vibrating with the specific, barely contained energy of children who know that summer begins when the bell rings. He had not tried to hold them for a lesson. He had sat on the edge of his desk and had said, I am retiring this year. This is my last class. I want to tell you one thing. They had been quiet enough to hear it. He had said the evidence leads where it leads. Your job is to follow, not where you thought it would go, not where you want it to go, where it actually goes. He had said, if you remember one thing from 6th grade science, remember that. The bell had rung. They had gone. He had sat in his empty classroom for 20 minutes. He had thought, I will miss this. He had thought, I will not miss the hours, or the grading, or the meetings. I will miss the moment when a student follows the evidence somewhere they did not expect to go and understands what that means. He had also thought, I still have Tuesdays and Thursdays. I still have Amara. He had thought 31 years is a long time to do one thing, and it is not enough time. The need did not diminish, and the method did not become obsolete, and the work was not finished just because he was done with it. He had thought Amara is 6. She has 12 more years of classrooms ahead of her. Someone is going to teach her the scientific method or something like it, and she may or may not retain it. I am going to be the person who talks to her in the car on Tuesdays and Thursdays, who asks what she learned and listens to the full answer and asks the next question. That is also teaching. It does not require a building. He had thought about this on the drive home from his last day at Carver, with the card from the faculty in the passenger seat and the science books he had kept 2 from his own shelves, 3 from the classroom library that the new teacher had told him he could take in a cardboard box in the trunk. He had driven the same route he had driven for 31 years, past the same intersections and the same buildings and the same compress building that still stood on the south side, and he had thought every Tuesday and Thursday now is mine. Not the school's, mine and Amara's. He had thought that is also a kind of retirement benefit, not one that comes with the pension paperwork, but one that compounds. He had parked in front of the house. He had sat in the car for 3 minutes. He had gone inside. He had said to Evelyn, I am retired. She had said, I know. Dinner is almost ready. He had sat down. He had been retired for exactly 47 days when the stop happened. He had thought many times in the months after, if I had still been teaching, the pickup would have been at 4:15, not 3:15, because the school day at Carver ran until 4. Amara would have been in after-school care until Naomi could get her. The stop would not have happened on that day in that form, because I would not have been in the car at 3:17 on a Tuesday. He had also thought retirement did not produce the stop. Retirement just put me in the car. He had also thought being in the car is where I was supposed to be. He had been in the car. He had been in the right place. He had handled what happened in the right place with the right method. He had come back. He had always planned to come back. He had said this sentence in various forms to 31 years of 6th graders. He had believed it about more than science. He had believed it about the things his students encountered outside of the classroom. He had believed it about the assumptions that the world formed about them, about what they were capable of, about where they came from, about what their presence in a given space meant, and about the evidence that contradicted those assumptions, and about whether the person holding the assumption would follow the evidence when it led somewhere they did not expect to go. He had not said this to his students in those terms because he was teaching science, and he understood the difference between teaching the method and applying the method to things that the 12-year-olds in his room were still figuring out how to carry. But he had thought it. He had believed it was the same thing. The evidence leads where it leads. Your job is to follow. He had married Evelyn Tate Whitfield in 1986. She was a woman who had grown up 20 miles outside Greenwood, the daughter of a minister and a school teacher, and who had come to Greenwood for a job at the county library and had met Cornelius at a church social, and had recognized in the first 2 hours of knowing him the specific quality she was going to spend the next 37 years appreciating the way he listened. He did not listen to formulate a response. He listened to find out what was true. She had thought that is a rare thing. Evelyn Tate had been a librarian for 33 years, and she was the kind of librarian who understood that the library's collection was not simply a repository, but a record, that what was in the stacks said something about what the institution believed was worth preserving, and that what was not in the stacks said something equally specific about what had been excluded. When she had been made head of collections at the Greenwood-LaFleur County Library, the first thing she had done was review what the Mississippi Delta collection contained and what it did not. What it did not contain: the labor histories, the oral account collections, the agricultural records that documented the specific arrangements that had shaped the Delta, the sharecropping contracts, the compress company records, the plantation ledgers from Reconstruction through the mid-20th century. She had spent 5 years building the collection. She had written grant applications. She had conducted oral history interviews. She had worked with community members to digitize family documents, letters, photographs, deeds, receipts, and had built a searchable archive that historians from across the state called her about. She had put Earl Whitfield's name in the database the year after he died in the record of compress workers documented in the County Labor History Project. She had not told Cornelius for 3 years. When she told him, he had been quiet for a long time. He had said, "You put him in the record." She had said yes. He had said, "Do the students know the collection is there?" She had said, "I go to the schools twice a year. Carver is on my list." He had said, "Come this spring." She had come. She had talked to his 6th grade classroom for 45 minutes and had brought 3 documents: a sharecropping contract from 1924, a compress employment roster from 1962, and a photograph of a LaFleur County family at their farm in 1947. She had asked the students whose names are in these documents, whose names are not. The students had looked. The students had understood something. They had been married in 1986. Their daughter, Naomi Grace Whitfield, had been born in 1990. Naomi had grown up in the house on Willow Street, 2 blocks from Carver Middle School. The house had been built in 1955 and had been, in the years before Cornelius bought it, owned by 2 other families. Cornelius and Evelyn had bought it in 1987, the year after they were married, because it was 2 blocks from Carver and because it had a front porch, and because it had a yard that Evelyn had said standing in it for the first time could become something. She had made it into something. By the time Naomi was growing up in the house, the yard had a vegetable garden and 2 pecan trees, and the porch had 2 chairs and a small table where Evelyn graded the library's summer reading logs and where Cornelius prepared his lessons. Naomi had grown up knowing that the yard had been made by her parents' attention, that the porch had been made by her parents' habit, and that the inside of the house, the books on every shelf, the library materials that Evelyn brought home, the science journals that Cornelius subscribed to and that were stacked by his reading chair, had been made by their specific understanding of what a house was for. A house was for learning in. A house was for the conversation that continued after the institution of the day had ended. A house was for the dinner table where the questions that came up during the day were taken further, and the answers were expected to be specific and the evidence was expected to be consulted. Naomi had grown up in the house on Willow Street, 2 blocks from Carver Middle School, in the specific way of a child whose father is a teacher and whose mother runs the library's children's programming, and who therefore grows up understanding that learning is not something that stops when you go home. She had also grown up understanding that Greenwood was a place with a specific history, a history her father taught in its scientific dimensions, its cause and effect dimensions, and a history her mother curated in the library's Mississippi Delta collection, and that the specific history of the place she came from was not separate from who she was. She had also grown up watching her father navigate Greenwood as a black man who drove a car and who was stopped occasionally and who handled those stops in a specific deliberate way that he had explained to her when she was 14 and getting her permit. You stop, you put your hands visible, you are precise and polite, you do not move unless you are asked to move, and you document afterward. She had said, "What does documenting afterward accomplish?" He had said, "It goes in the record. And the record over time is what you have." She had gone to nursing school in Jackson. She had come back to Greenwood. She had come back because Amara's father had left when Amara was 8 months old, and because Greenwood had Evelyn and Cornelius, and because the county hospital had a nursing shortage, and because Naomi had not wanted to be somewhere else alone with a baby when she had somewhere specific she could be. Coming back had not been defeat. It had been the accurate assessment of where the resources were. The resources were Evelyn, who came to the house on Wednesday evenings with food and who stayed until Amara was asleep, and who had, in those Wednesday evenings, taught Amara the specific pleasure of being read to by someone who had read to children professionally, and who understood that the reading was a conversation and not a performance. The resources were Cornelius, who picked up Amara on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and who had in those 14 months of pickups built with Amara a specific vocabulary of the known world, the kind of vocabulary that children build with the adults who have time for the specific questions. What kind of cloud is that, Papa? Why does the road look wet when it isn't? Where do the birds go in winter? He had answered every question. He had never said "I don't know" and meant it as an end. He had said "I don't know" and then "let's find out." They had found out over 14 months quite a lot. Amara had been born in March of 2017. She had been calling Cornelius Papa since she could talk, because that was what Naomi called him in front of her, and because Cornelius was the person Amara associated with the specific reliable quality of being picked up from daycare from kindergarten, now from Pinehurst Elementary, with a predictability that she could count on the way that 6-year-olds count on the predictable things Tuesday and Thursday, 3:15, the green Buick LeSabre that had been Cornelius's car for 9 years, and that Amara knew by sound before she saw it. She had known the car was coming before she could see it in the dismissal line. Amara had a specific, accurate sense of when things were about to happen that Cornelius associated with the quality he thought of as attentiveness. Not an intuition exactly, but the product of a child who paid attention to the patterns of the world around her, and who noticed when the patterns were running normally and when they were not. She knew the sound of the green Buick. She knew approximately where in the line it appeared based on when it turned off Grand Boulevard. She knew that if Papa was on time, which he always was, the car would be visible at approximately 3:14 and would reach the curb at approximately 3:16. She was, by the time she was 6, a reliable timekeeper. She was also in the 14 months of pickups beginning to develop the vocabulary of a child who has been answering questions seriously. When Cornelius asked, "How was school?" she did not say "fine," the way that children say "fine" when the question has not been asked seriously. She told him what they had done and what she had learned and what she was still not sure about. He had noticed in the 3rd month of pickups that her answers were getting longer. He had thought she is learning to report. She is learning the difference between giving an account and giving a summary. He had thought that is Dr. Hale's thing. You go where the evidence leads. He had thought I am teaching this without knowing I am teaching it. That Tuesday in September, she had gotten into the car at 3:17. She had put her backpack beside her and had unzipped the front pocket and had taken out a worksheet with a drawing of a frog's life cycle that she had colored during art time. The eggs were green. The tadpoles were darker green. The frog at the end was the brightest green she had, which was a crayon labeled jungle green that she considered her best one. She had said before he could ask we did frogs today. Cornelius had said I can see that. That is a very green frog. Amara had said Mrs. Fraser said frogs come in many colors. He had said that is true. There are frogs that are red, blue, yellow, orange. She had said why are they different colors? He had said some colors are camouflage. They help the frog hide. Other colors are warnings. They tell predators that the frog is dangerous. She had said so the color is a message. He had said yes. The color is a message. She had looked at her worksheet. She had said what message does jungle green send? He had said I think jungle green says I belong here. She had said okay. Cornelius had said how was school? Amara had said we did frogs. He had said what kind of frogs? She had said the real kind. They had pictures. He had said, what did you learn about the real kind? She had said they start as eggs and then they change. He had said that is called metamorphosis. She had said, I know, Mrs. Fraser told us. He had said Mrs. Fraser is right. They had driven 3 blocks. The cruiser had come from a side street and had fallen in behind the Buick and had run the plates and had pulled them over. Cornelius had put on his turn signal and had pulled to the curb. He had known what was happening with the immediate practiced clarity of a black man in Mississippi who has been driving for 49 years and who has been pulled over 11 times in those 49 years. The first stop had been in 1974 when he was 14 and not yet driving, but in the car when his older brother James was stopped on the way home from a basketball game. The second had been in 1979, his first year of driving on a road outside Greenwood on his way back from a church function. He had not done anything wrong either time. He had not done anything wrong in any of the 11 times. He had learned over 11 stops in 49 years the specific discipline of the procedure. Hands visible. Voice level. No sudden movements, be precise about what you are and what you have and what you are doing. Document afterward. He had refined it after each stop. He had told James the procedure after James's second stop. He had told Naomi the procedure when she got her license. He had in the months since he had been picking up Amara thought about the fact that Amara was now watching from the back seat and had thought, she is 6. She is too young for the procedure conversation, but she is not too young to watch. He had thought she will remember this in the way that children remember things they did not understand at the time, but that become legible later. He had put his hands on the steering wheel. He had said to Amara before the officer reached the window, Amara, I need you to be very quiet for a few minutes. I am going to talk to the officer. Everything is fine. I need you to stay in your seat and let me handle this. Amara had said, okay, Papa. She had said, will it take long? He had said, I am not sure, but I am right here and you are safe. Do you understand? She had said yes. She had looked at him. She had said, Papa, are we in trouble? He had said no. We are not in trouble. Sometimes things happen that look like trouble but are not. I am going to explain everything to the officer and then we are going to go home. She had said okay. He had said, I need you to be quiet now. She had said, okay, Papa. She had been quiet. The officer's name was Raymond Stokes. He was 29 years old and had been with the Greenwood Police Department for 4 years. He had run the plates on the Buick and had gotten a return that showed the vehicle registered to a Cornelius James Whitfield at a Willow Street address. He had also received, in the moment before he ran the plates, a radio call that described a vehicle matching the Buick's description in a report of a possible custodial dispute at Pinehurst Elementary. A report that had come in from the school secretary who had called after a woman had come into the office and said that she believed a child was being picked up by someone who shouldn't be picking her up. The woman was a parent named Charlene Dupree, who had been waiting for her own daughter in the pickup line. She had moved to Greenwood 2 years earlier from Gulfport, and she did not know most of the families at Pinehurst yet in the way that parents who are 2 years in do not yet know the families who have been there for 6 or 8 or 10 years. She had been watching the pickup line in the general unfocused way of a person waiting, and she had seen Amara, a child she did not know belonging to a family she did not know, approach a green Buick and get in. She had seen a black man she did not recognize. She had seen a black child she did not recognize get into his car. She had not asked herself what is the most likely explanation for a child who approaches a car at a school pickup line with the easy familiarity of a child who knows where she is going. She had not asked herself, what does it mean that the child approached? The car was not approached by the car was not guided or directed, but walked to it as if she knew it. She had not asked because the thought that formed was not a question. It was an assessment. The assessment said that does not look right. And the assessment had formed before any of the available information the child's familiarity with the car, the school's pickup records, the routine nature of a child being picked up at a school had been examined. She had gone into the school office and had said, I think a child just got into a car with someone who shouldn't have her. The school secretary had called the police. The school had Cornelius Whitfield on file as an authorized pickup. The school had his photograph. The school had the emergency contact designation from September of the previous year. The school had not been consulted before the call was made because the call had been made by Charlene Dupree to the police, not to the school, and by the time the school's records might have been checked, the cruiser was already behind the Buick. Raymond Stokes was 29 years old and had been on the force for 4 years. He had grown up in Grenada, 30 miles north, and had come to Greenwood for the police academy because a cousin was on the Greenwood force and had said the department was hiring. He was not a bad officer in the specific ways that produce obvious problems. He was not abusive. He was not a bully. He did not use his authority carelessly in the ways that produce incidents. He was, in most respects, the officer the department expected him to be. He also had not learned or had not been taught well enough the specific evaluation step that turns a dispatch call into a verified basis for action. The department's guidelines on custodial dispute calls required in the protocol verification of the claim before physical action is taken. The verification step for a custodial dispute call at a school was contact the school. Schools maintain authorized pickup records. The school can verify or deny whether the pickup was authorized in 60 seconds. He had not contacted the school. He had gotten the radio call describing a possible custodial dispute and had seen a vehicle matching the description and had made the stop. The stop was not by itself wrong. What happened after the stop was what the review found to be procedurally incorrect. The documentation review had not happened before the handcuffs. Raymond Stokes had not checked the school's records before he made the stop. He had gotten the radio call and had seen the vehicle and had made the stop. He had come to the window. He had said, "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." Cornelius had said, "I am going to do that. But first I want to tell you that the child in this car is my granddaughter. Her name is Amara Whitfield. Her mother is my daughter, Naomi Whitfield. I am an authorized pickup at Pinehurst Elementary and I have documentation. The documentation is on my phone. May I show it to you?" Stokes had said, "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Cornelius had stepped out of the vehicle. He had held both hands visible. He had said, "Officer, I have documentation on my phone that establishes that I am an authorized pickup for my granddaughter. I also have a photograph of Amara and me in my wallet. I would like you to look at the documentation before we proceed." Stokes had said, "I need you to place your hands behind your back." Cornelius had said, "I am going to cooperate with everything you ask. I want the record to show that I have offered documentation and you have declined to look at it." The cuffs had gone on. Amara had been watching from the back seat. She had said through the window, "Papa." Cornelius had said through the window, "I am fine. Stay in the car. I will be right back." He had not been right back for 2 hours and 17 minutes. He had been taken to the Greenwood Police Department. In the cruiser, he had said, "Officer, I want to be clear that I am cooperating with everything you have asked. I also want the record to show that I have offered documentation 3 times a school authorization on my phone and a photograph in my wallet, and that it has not been reviewed. I am going to continue asking for it to be reviewed." Stokes had said, "We will sort this out at the station." Cornelius had said, "Yes, we will." He had been seated in an interview room. The room was small, with a table and 2 chairs, and a window of frosted glass. He had sat with his hands on the table and had thought in the deliberate way of a man who has 31 years of teaching behind him and who knows how to use the time he is given. I know who I am. I know what I was doing. The documentation exists. The school's records exist. Naomi is going to be called. The truth of this situation is reachable through multiple avenues. He had thought the reaching takes time. And in that time, Amara is not in the car, and I do not know where she is. He had thought about Amara in the way that a man thinks about a specific thing when he cannot do anything about it with the specific controlled quality of attention that keeps the fear from becoming the only thing. He had thought she knows where she is going when we leave school. She knows the car. She knows the house on Willow Street. She knows Evelyn. She knows her mother. She is 6 years old, and she is in a specific, frightening situation that she did not choose, and she is going to be in that situation for a period of time, and when it ends, she is going to have a memory of it that she does not have the vocabulary to fully understand yet. He had thought, I have 2 jobs right now. The first job is to get through this correctly, to be precise and calm and document and follow the process. The second job is to think about what I am going to say to Amara when I see her. He had thought about what he was going to say. He had decided I am going to tell her the truth in the terms she can receive. The truth is, sometimes people make mistakes. When they make mistakes, you tell the truth about what happened. You document it, and you find the right people to help you correct it. We did all 3 of those things. The mistake is in the record. The correction is in the record. You are safe, and I am here. He had asked for the 3rd time whether anyone had called his daughter or contacted the school. The officer who had processed him had said, we are looking into it. Naomi had been reached by phone at 4:20 p.m. She had been in the hospital's general medical ward in the first hour of her nursing clinical. She was in the 2nd year of her nursing program. She had already been an LPN for 4 years and was completing her RN requirements, and the clinical hours were structured and required, and not easily interrupted. The nurse supervisor on duty was a woman named Charlene Odom, who had been a supervising nurse for 21 years, and who had the specific exact calibration of someone who knew when a student's personal situation was going to override the clinical. She had seen Naomi's face when Naomi looked at her phone. She had said what happened. Naomi had said, someone has my daughter at the police station. She had said, go. Naomi had said, I have to the hours. Charlene Odom had said, I will note the clinical interruption in the record. It will not affect your hours. Go get your daughter. She had said, I am leaving right now. Do not move my daughter. Amara had been taken from the car by a 2nd officer and had been held at the station in a room with a woman from Child Protective Services who had arrived at 4:07. The CPS worker's name was Denise Rollins. She was 44 years old and had been with the county's Child Protective Services office for 16 years, and who had in 16 years developed the specific skill of being present with children in frightening situations in a way that did not make the situation more frightening. She had given Amara a juice box and had found a picture book, a book about animals that someone had left in the waiting area, and had sat next to Amara on the bench and had opened the book. She had said, do you want to look at this together? Amara had looked at the cover. She had said, that is a frog. Denise had said, it is. What do you know about frogs? Amara had said they start as eggs and they change. It is called metamorphosis. Denise had said, that is right. Where did you learn that? Amara had said, Papa told me. We learned it in school today, and I told Papa, and he said the word. Denise had said, Papa sounds like someone who knows things. Amara had said he knows a lot of things. She had looked at the picture book for 2 more minutes. She had said at 4:19, I want Papa. Denise had said, I know. Your mom is almost here. Amara had said, is Papa coming back? Denise had said, yes. Everyone is going to be okay. Amara had looked at her. She had said, how do you know? Denise had said, because your mom is on her way and she is going to take care of it. Amara had thought about that. She had said, okay. She had sat with the picture book in her lap and had not looked at the pictures. She had looked at the door. She had looked at the clock on the wall, which she could not fully read yet, but which she knew moved. She had looked at it moving. She had said, how long has it been? Denise had said, about an hour and a half. Amara had said, that is a long time. Denise had said, it is, but your mom is coming very fast. Amara had said, is Papa okay? Denise had said, yes. Your Papa is fine. He is just waiting too. Amara had thought about this. She had said, we are both waiting. Denise had said, yes. Amara had said, at least we are both waiting. Denise had looked at her. She had said, that is a very wise thing to say. Amara had said, Papa says that when you are waiting for something, it helps to know someone is waiting with you. She had looked at the clock again. She had said at 4:28, I want Papa. The CPS worker had said, I know. Your mom is almost here. Naomi had arrived at 4:31. She had walked through the door and Amara had said, Mama, they took Papa. Naomi had said, I know, I'm getting him back. She had gone to the desk and had spoken with the duty officer in the voice of a woman who is controlling something that, if not controlled, is going to exceed what the duty officer is equipped to handle. She had said, I am Naomi Whitfield. The man you have in your interview room is my father, Cornelius Whitfield. He is an authorized pickup for my daughter, which he has been for 14 months. His authorization is on file at Pinehurst Elementary. I would like him released now. I also want the name of the officer who made the stop and the name of the officer who authorized the processing. The duty officer had said, ma'am, we are completing our... Naomi had said, I want those two names and I want my father released. I have 30 minutes before I need to be back at a clinical. I intend to use those 30 minutes productively. Cornelius had been released at 4:51. He had come out of the interview room. Amara had run across the room. She had said, Papa. He had said, I am right here. He had picked her up. He had held her for a long moment. Then he had set her down and had looked at Naomi. Naomi had been standing with her arms at her sides, which was the specific posture she had when she was holding something that was not going to be held much longer. She had said, Papa. He had said, I am fine. Are you all right? She had said no. But I will be, after I make some phone calls. He had said, Theodora. She had said, first call tomorrow morning. He had said yes. He had looked at her for a long moment. He had said, Naomi, thank you for getting here. She had said, of course. He had said, I did not know where Amara was for 2 hours. That was the hardest part. She had said, I know. He had said, she is all right. She had said, I know. She told me about metamorphosis on the drive over. He had looked at Amara. Amara had looked at him. She had said, Papa, can we go home now? He had said, yes, we are going home. She had said, is dinner ready? He had not known whether dinner was ready. He had said, we will figure it out. She had said, okay. He had said, we will deal with it. Let's get out of here first. They had gotten in the car. Amara was in the back seat holding Naomi's hand. She had said, after the first block, Papa, why did you have to stay so long? He had said the officer needed to ask me some questions, and it took a long time for the right answers to reach the right place. She had said, were the answers right? He had said yes. They were always right. They just needed time to get organized. She had looked out the window. She had said, I told the lady you know a lot of things. He had said, what lady? She had said, the lady at the police station. She said, Papa sounds like someone who knows things. I said, you know a lot of things. He had looked at Naomi. Naomi had looked at the road. He had said, what else did you talk about? Amara had said, frogs. He had said, frogs. She had said, I told her about metamorphosis. He had said, good. They had gotten out of there. That evening, Cornelius and Naomi had sat at the kitchen table on Willow Street while Evelyn put Amara to bed. Naomi had her phone face down on the table. Cornelius had his hands flat the way he had sat in the interview room, and he had thought, I want to stop sitting with my hands flat. He had put his hands in his lap. He had thought in the way he had been thinking since the interview room. Amara is going to process what happened at her own pace and in her own order. She had processed it so far by telling the CPS worker about metamorphosis. That was the specific quality of a child who has been taught that when things are uncertain, you return to what you know. What she knew was metamorphosis. She had returned to it. He had thought, that is correct. That is what you do. He had thought she watched me from the back seat the way I watched my father from the back seat. He had thought she was 6. She is going to remember this. The question is what she is going to remember about it. He had thought, I want her to remember that I came back, that the documentation was right, that the truth of the situation was available and was eventually reached. I want her to remember that the process slow as it was ended in the correct place. He had thought, that is the account I'm going to give her, in the terms she can receive, over time. Naomi had said, I want to file a complaint. He had said yes. She had said, I want to call Theodora Okafor-Bell in the morning. He had said yes. She had said, before I call her, tell me you are actually all right. Not the thing you say when you want me to stop worrying. He had looked at her. He had said, I am all right in the sense that nothing happened that I did not know how to handle. I am not all right in the sense that I watched Amara watch me from the back seat, and I do not know what she understood from what she saw. That is the part I am still thinking about. She had said she is all right. She told me about metamorphosis on the way home. He had said, I know, she told me. She had said, Papa. He had said, yes. She had said, I am sorry this happened. He had said you have nothing to be sorry for. She had said, I know, I'm still sorry. Evelyn had come back from putting Amara to bed. She had said she asked for you. I told her you were downstairs. She said he always comes back. Cornelius had looked at his wife. He had said, yes, I do. Evelyn had sat down and had put her hand on his. She had said she told me one thing. She said Grandma Papa knows the right answers. I told the lady at the station. The lady said Papa sounds like someone who knows things. Naomi had said she told me too. Cornelius had said I was worried she was going to remember the cuffs and be frightened. She remembered metamorphosis. He had said she thought about what she knows, not what she was afraid of. Evelyn had said she learned that from someone. He had said she learned it from her mother. Naomi had said she learned it from you. The kitchen had been quiet. The formal complaint had been filed the following week by an attorney named Theodora Okafor Bell, who had been practicing civil rights law in the Mississippi Delta for 19 years. Theodora Okafor Bell had grown up in Indianola, 20 miles south of Greenwood, the daughter of a Delta farm worker and a woman who did alterations from the house. She had been the first person in her family to go to law school. She had gone to Jackson State for her undergraduate degree and to the University of Mississippi School of Law, which had required a specific kind of daily determination that she had brought to it without complaint, but also without pretending it was easy. She had graduated in the top third of her class. She had clerked for 2 years in federal court in Oxford. She had come back to the Delta. She had come back because the Delta had specific legal needs that were not being met by attorneys who did not live there, and because she had grown up knowing exactly what those needs were, and because she had decided in the second year of her clerkship that the most useful thing she could do with her law degree was go to where the work was and stay there. She had been staying there for 19 years. She had handled in those 19 years cases that spanned wrongful employment termination, unlawful eviction, public accommodation discrimination, police misconduct, school discipline, disparities, and the specific category of stop and detention cases involving black men and women in the Delta counties who had been detained on the basis of unverified reports or insufficient basis and who had not known that the law offered them a remedy or who had not known how to access it. She had won more than she had lost. She had not won all of them. The ones she had not won, she kept in a separate file in her office labeled with the case numbers and her own notation of what the case had established, even in losing what the record now showed, what precedent had been built, what the outcome had added to the available documentation of how these situations proceeded. She had received a call from Naomi Whitfield on the Wednesday after the incident. She had listened to the account. She had taken the case in the first phone call. She had said to Cornelius on the second phone call, I need the timeline, the documentation that was available before, the names of both officers, and the name of the person who made the original call to the school. Cornelius had said, I have all of that. She had said, I know you do. That is why I am taking this case. The complaint was 12 pages. Theodora had written it in 2.5 days, working from the timeline Cornelius had dictated to her on the phone and from the documents she had requested from the school and from the department. She had the school's authorized pickup record dated September of the previous year. She had the school's camera footage logs, which documented the timestamp at which Amara had entered the Buick. She had the dispatch log, which documented the timestamp at which the call had come in and the content of the call. She had Cornelius's phone records, which documented the authorization document on his phone. She had the incident report filed by Officer Stokes, which documented the timeline of the stop, the cuffing, and the processing. She had said to Cornelius on the third phone call, after reviewing all the documents, every piece of information that would have resolved this situation was available before the handcuffs went on. The school's record, the phone authorization, the photograph, your account of who Amara was, every piece of it. He had said yes. She had said, and none of it was reviewed. He had said no. She had said that is the complaint. The complaint detailed in the sequential way of a document written by someone who has spent 19 years making sure that documents hold up the call from Charlene Dupree. The school's dispatch procedure. The available records at Pinehurst Elementary that had not been consulted before the police were called. The stop, the cuffing, the processing. The 2 hours and 17 minutes Amara's time in the CPS room, and the documentation that Cornelius had offered at the window, and that had not been reviewed before the handcuffs were applied. Theodora had worked with Cornelius for 2 weeks before filing to make sure the complaint was complete. She had gone through it section by section, asking him to confirm each fact and each timestamp and each sequence. She had said when they reached the 4th section, "This is the hardest section to write because it asks a question the department cannot answer through procedure. The question is, why was the offered documentation not reviewed? The answer is not in the protocol. The answer is in what Officer Stokes assessed before he got out of the car. And that assessment is not in any document because it happened before the documentation." Cornelius had said the assumption was present before the documentation. She had said yes. He had said the assessment formed before the information was available. She had said yes. That is what the 4th section says, in the language of a legal complaint. He had said write it. The complaint named 3 failures. The first, the school's dispatch procedure, which had allowed a third party to initiate a police response without first checking the school's own authorized pickup records. The school secretary had taken the complaint from Charlene Dupree and had called the police without opening the student file. The student file would have resolved the question in 60 seconds. The second, Officer Stokes's stop, which had been made on the basis of a radio call describing a possible custodial dispute without any evaluation of the specific basis for the call or any attempt to verify the claim through the school's records before conducting the stop. The third, the decision to apply handcuffs before reviewing the documentation that Cornelius Whitfield had offered 3 times before and during the stop. The school district's response came first. Dr. Sandra Hawkins had been the one to call the district's legal team on the morning after the incident. She had reviewed the authorized pickup records herself at 7 in the morning and had found Cornelius Whitfield's entry authorized pickup Tuesdays and Thursdays photograph attached. She had looked at the record for a long time. She had called the district's general counsel at 8:15. She had said, "I want to know what our liability is, and I want to know what our protocol should have been." Not for the complaint. For the children at this school who have authorized pickups in their files and whose pickups are going to be verified going forward. The general counsel had said, "We will send someone next week." She had said, "I need someone this week." Someone had come this week. The protocol review had taken 3 weeks. The new protocol was 8 pages and covered who is authorized to call law enforcement on behalf of a custody concern. The verification steps that must be completed before the call is made. What the verification consists of: name relationship, school authorization record, school photograph if available, and what to do if the verification cannot be completed in time. A non-911 wellness check through the school resource officer, not a criminal dispatch. Dr. Hawkins had also sent a letter to every family at Pinehurst. The letter had described in general terms, without identifying the specific incident, that the school had updated its procedures for responding to concerns about student pickups, and that the new procedures required verification of authorized pickup records before any law enforcement call was made on behalf of a custody concern. She had also sent separately a handwritten note to Naomi Whitfield. The note had said, "I am sorry that what happened at pickup from this school. The record at this school was correct from the beginning. The record was not consulted when it should have been. I am going to make sure it is consulted going forward." Naomi had read the note twice. She had said to Cornelius, "The principal wrote to me by hand." He had said yes. She said the record was correct from the beginning. He had said it was. She had said she knows it was. He had said yes. The school district's response came first because the school was part of a district with a legal team that moved quickly when legal teams are required to move quickly. The response acknowledged the procedural failure in the dispatch. The school secretary had not consulted the authorized pickup records before calling 911. The district was implementing a new protocol requiring authorized pickup verification before any law enforcement call was made on behalf of a custody concern. The Greenwood Police Department's review took longer. It found Officer Stokes had made the stop on the basis of a radio dispatch describing a possible custodial dispute. The review found that the dispatch had been based on an unverified report from a civilian with no knowledge of the child's custodial arrangements. The review found that the documentation offered by the subject of the stop had not been reviewed before handcuffs were applied. The review recommended mandatory retraining in the department's stop and verify protocol for custodial dispute calls. Officer Stokes received mandatory retraining. He did not receive a formal written reprimand. Theodora Okafor-Bell reviewed the departmental response. She said to Cornelius, "The recommendation is inadequate. The retraining addresses the protocol. It does not address why the offered documentation was not reviewed. I want to take this further." Cornelius had said, "What does further look like?" She had said a formal complaint to the Mississippi Department of Public Safety and a civil claim. He had said, "What does the civil claim accomplish?" She had said a public finding in a court record that what happened was wrong. Not just that a protocol was improperly followed. That the decision to cuff a man before looking at the documentation he was offering, the decision that produced 2 hours and 17 minutes, and your granddaughter sitting in a room asking for Papa, was wrong. He had said, "I need to talk to Evelyn and Naomi." He had talked to Evelyn and Naomi. Evelyn had said yes. Naomi had said yes. "And I want to be there for the hearing." In the 6 weeks between the filing and the hearing, Cornelius had continued the Tuesday and Thursday pickups. He had discussed this with Naomi. She had said, "Are you sure you want to keep going after what happened?" He had said, "Amara expects me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The expectation is correct. I am going to keep meeting it." She had said, "What if something happens again?" He had said, "I will handle it the same way. The documentation is on my phone. The school's records are in the system. I have Theodora's number. I know the procedure." She had said, "I know you know the procedure. I am asking how you feel about doing it again." He had said, "I feel that Amara is waiting for the green Buick at 3:15, and the green Buick is going to be there." Naomi had said, "Okay." She had said, "Papa, call me when you have her in the car. Every time." He had said yes. He had called her every Tuesday and every Thursday for the 6 weeks. The pickups had been ordinary. He had pulled up to the curb at 3:15 or 3:16, and Amara had gotten in, and they had driven home, and she had told him what they had done in school that day, and he had asked questions, and she had answered them, and the green Buick had made the same turns it had always made, past the same houses and the same corner store and the same church and the same block where the Compress building stood. The Compress building had been there for 64 years. He drove past it every Tuesday and Thursday. He had been driving past it for as long as he could remember. The hearing had been scheduled for the Tuesday morning in September. Theodora had told Cornelius in the week before the hearing what the hearing was and what it was not. It was not a criminal proceeding. It was a civil proceeding on the complaint before a judge to establish the record of what had happened and to determine whether the remedies requested were appropriate. She had told him what the judge would ask, what the department's attorney would argue, and what the school district's attorney would say. She had told him what to expect when Amara's testimony was requested. He had said Amara is going to testify. She had said the judge is likely to ask to speak with her directly, not in the formal way of a witness, in the way a judge speaks to a child to understand the situation. "I will prepare her." She had spoken to Amara the Thursday before the hearing. Amara had sat across from Theodora at the kitchen table on Willow Street with Evelyn in the kitchen and Cornelius in the living room, and Theodora had explained in the careful, specific way she had developed for children, "The judge is a person whose job is to decide what is true when people disagree. He is going to ask you some questions. You just tell him what is true. You do not need to say anything that is not true. If you do not know the answer to a question, you say, 'I don't know.' That is a good answer." Amara had said, "What if I'm scared?" Theodora had said, "Then you tell me and I will be right next to you." Amara had said, "Will Papa be there?" Theodora had said, "Yes. Papa will be in the room." Amara had said, "Okay, I can do it if Papa is in the room." Theodora had looked at her. She had said, "I know you can." The hearing had been scheduled for the Tuesday morning in September. In the 6 weeks between the filing and the hearing, Amara had, on 3 separate occasions, told Cornelius something that he had written down in the small notebook he kept by his chair in the living room. Because writing things down was a habit from 31 years of teaching, and he had not seen a reason to stop. The 3 things were: on the first occasion, 3 days after the incident, "Papa, why did that man put the silver things on your wrists?" He had said the man thought he needed to ask me some questions, and he put the silver things on to make sure I stayed for the questions. She had said you would have stayed. He had said, "I know, I tried to tell him that." She had said he should have listened. He had said, "You are right, he should have." She had been quiet. She had said, "Papa, did it hurt?" He had said no. It was uncomfortable, but it did not hurt. She had said, "Were you scared?" He had said a little. But mostly I was thinking about how to make sure everyone understood what was really happening. She had said, "Did they understand?" He had said they did eventually. The answers got to the right place. It just took longer than it should have. She had thought about this. She had said, "Papa, I want to know when things like that happen." He had looked at her. He had said, "I will tell you when you are old enough to understand all of it." She had said, "I'm already old enough for some of it." He had said, "Yes, you are." He had said some of it is this: sometimes people make decisions before they know all the information. When that happens, the answer is to get the right information to the right place as fast as possible. That is what I did, and eventually it worked. She had said eventually is a long time. He had said sometimes it is, yes. She had said I was scared too. He had said, "I know, I am sorry you were scared." She had said the lady was nice. She talked about frogs. He had said good. On the second occasion in the car on the way to school on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after Papa, "If it happens again, will you come back?" He had said, "Amara, it is my job to pick you up. If something happens that makes it take longer, I will come back. I always come back." She had said, "Promise." He had said yes. She had said okay. She had looked out the window. She had said, "Papa, can frogs come back?" He had said, "What do you mean?" She had said, "If you put them in a different place, do they come back to where they were?" He had said, "Some of them do. Some frogs can find their way back to the same pond year after year." She had said, "How do they know?" He had said, "Scientists are not entirely sure. They think it has something to do with the way the frog learns the place when it is young." She had said, "They remember." He had said, "Yes, they remember." She had gone back to looking out the window. On the third occasion, the morning of the hearing in the kitchen at the Willow Street house, while Evelyn pressed the green dress. Amara had been watching Evelyn iron. She had said, "Grandma, why do you press the dress?" Evelyn had said, "Because the dress should look right for the occasion." Amara had said, "What is the occasion?" Evelyn had said, "We are going somewhere important today." Amara had said, "The place with the judge." Evelyn had said, "Yes." Amara had looked at Cornelius, who had been at the table with his coffee. She had said, "Papa, are we going to the place where the man asks questions?" He had said, "Yes, but today I am the one who gets to answer, and then the judge is going to decide." She had said, "What does the judge decide?" He had said, "The judge decides what the record says. He decides what is true, and he writes it down in a way that everyone can see." She had said, "What is going to be true?" He had said, "That I was your grandfather, that I was picking you up, that the documentation was there, that the right answers were always right. The judge is going to say all of that in the record." She had looked at her dress. She had said, "Will the record say you are coming back?" He had said, "Yes, the record will say that." She had said, "Good, because you always come back." He had said, "Yes, I always come back." She had said, "Okay." She had gone back to watching Evelyn press the dress. Evelyn was working the collar with the iron, the specific, careful pressure of someone who has been pressing dress shirts and Sunday clothes for 40 years, and who knows exactly how much heat the fabric wants. Amara watched the steam come out of the iron. She had said, "Grandma, does steam hurt?" Evelyn had said, "If you get too close, stay back." Amara had stayed back. She had said, "Papa." He had said, "Yes." She had said, "I am glad we are going." He had said, "Why?" She had said, "Because the judge is going to say what is true, and then everyone will know." He had said, "Yes, that is why we are going." The hearing had lasted 42 minutes before the judge had asked the question. The judge was the Honorable Reginald Tate, who had been on the bench in Lafleur County for 14 years, and who had over those 14 years developed the specific judicial patience that comes from understanding that the record in front of you is made of people, and that the people are often not the record. Judge Tate had grown up in Holmes County, 40 minutes south, in a family that had been in the Delta for 4 generations. He had gone to Tougaloo College and to the University of Mississippi Law School, had practiced for 12 years in Greenwood before being appointed to the bench, and had developed in 12 years of practice and 14 years on the bench a specific understanding of the kinds of cases that were brought to him and the kinds of cases that were not. The cases that were not brought were often the ones where the injury was real and the remedy was available. But the person who had been injured had not known the remedy existed, or had not been able to access the mechanism that would have made it accessible. He had read Theodora Okafor-Bell's 12-page complaint 3 days before the hearing. He had read the school district's response. He had read the police department's review, which he had found adequate in its acknowledgement of the procedural failures and inadequate in its remediation. The mandatory retraining addressed the procedure and did not address the question of why the offered documentation had not been reviewed before the handcuffs were applied. He had noted this in the margin. He had read the emergency contact authorization from Pinehurst Elementary, dated September of the previous year. Cornelius James Whitfield relationship grandfather authorized for pickup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The document had the school's seal and the principal's signature, and a photograph of Cornelius attached. Theodora had submitted as Exhibit C a copy of the photograph from Cornelius's wallet, the graduation photograph Cornelius and Amara at her kindergarten graduation in May. Cornelius was 66 in the photograph in a light blue shirt with Amara in her graduation gown, which was the small paper kind that the kindergartners wore at Pinehurst. Both of them were looking at the camera. Amara was holding Cornelius's hand. He had looked at the photograph for a long moment. He had thought the school's system had this photograph. The wallet had this photograph. The documentation was available at the school before the call was made, and it was available in the car when the stop was made, and it was offered 3 times before the handcuffs went on. He had set it down. He had asked his 4 questions. He had looked at the child. He had said, "Is there someone in this room you would like to be near?" Amara had pointed. She had said, "Papa." The courtroom had been quiet. Cornelius had gone to where Amara was sitting and had put his hand on her shoulder and had stood beside her. The judge had said, "Counselor Okafor Bell, I have read the departmental review's finding that this matter has been addressed through mandatory retraining. I have also read your assessment that the retraining is insufficient. I agree with your assessment." He had said the record in this matter will reflect 3 specific findings. First, the school's dispatch procedure produced a police response without verification of the available authorized pickup records. This is a systemic, he had paused, had substituted the word procedural failure that the district has begun to address. The court commends the speed of the district's response. He had said, second, the stop was made on the basis of an unverified radio dispatch describing a possible custodial dispute. Officer Stokes made physical contact handcuffs with a man who had offered documentation 3 times before the contact was made, and who had identified himself and the child correctly on each occasion. The department's own guidelines require that offered documentation be reviewed before physical restraint is applied unless the officer has an articulable safety concern. The review found no articulable safety concern. The physical restraint preceded the documentation review. That is a violation of the department's own protocol, and it is in the record. He had said, third, the child Amara Jean Whitfield was separated from her grandfather for 2 hours and 17 minutes as a result of a stop that was initiated by an unverified report and conducted in a manner that the department's own review found to be procedurally incorrect. The record will reflect that. He had paused. He had said the court also notes that Officer Stokes in the department's own review stated that he did not review the documentation offered by Mr. Whitfield because he needed to secure the scene first. The court finds this reasoning unpersuasive. Mr. Whitfield offered documentation before any physical restraint was applied. The scene was a grandfather's car on a public street 3 blocks from an elementary school with a 6-year-old child in the back seat. The offered documentation, which included an authorization that could have been verified by contacting the school in 60 seconds, was not reviewed. The reason the documentation was not reviewed is not in the record. The effect of that unreview is 2 hours and 17 minutes and a 6-year-old asking for Papa. He had said the court orders the Greenwood Police Department to submit a written protocol within 30 days addressing the handling of custodial dispute calls, specifically the verification requirements before a stop is made and the documentation review requirements before physical restraint is applied. He had said the protocol must include specifically the requirement that when a subject of a stop offers documentation, the documentation must be reviewed before physical restraint is applied, unless the officer has a specific articulable safety concern that is documented in the incident report. If the officer cannot articulate a safety concern at the time of the incident, The physical restraint cannot be justified retroactively. He had said the court finds that the civil claim has merit. The parties will proceed to the remedial phase. Theodora Okafor-Bell had said, "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge had looked at Cornelius. He had said, "Mr. Whitfield, you offered documentation 3 times before the handcuffs were applied." Cornelius had said yes. The judge had said, "What documentation did you offer?" Cornelius had said, "I told Officer Stokes that the child in the car was my granddaughter. I gave her name and her mother's name and my relationship. I told him I had the school authorization on my phone. I told him I had a photograph in my wallet. I offered all 3 before and during the stop." The judge had said, and none of it was reviewed before the handcuffs. Cornelius had said, "No, Your Honor." The judge had said, "What was the most important thing to you in the 2 hours and 17 minutes? Cornelius had been quiet for a moment. He had said, knowing where Amara was. "That was the only thing I was uncertain about. I knew what I had done. I knew the documentation existed. I knew the answers were correct. What I did not know was where she was." The judge had said, "That is in the record too." He had looked at Amara. He had said, "Young lady, do you understand what happened here today?" Amara had looked at him. She had said yes. He had said what happened. She had said the judge said Papa was right. The judge had said yes. That is what happened. He had said to the room in the specific way of a judge who has earned the right to say something that is not in the record because the situation calls for it. This child has been calling this man Papa since she could talk. The documentation established that. The photograph in his wallet established that. The school's authorized pickup records established that. The dispatch that initiated the stop was based on an unverified report from someone who did not know either of them. Every piece of information that established who these 2 people were to each other was available before the handcuffs were applied. It was not consulted. He had said the record will contain every relevant finding. The record will also contain, because I am putting it there, that when I asked whether there was someone in this room she would like to be near, she pointed across the room without hesitating and called his name. She did not point to her mother, who was also in the room. She did not point to her attorney. She pointed to her grandfather. She said, "Papa." He had said, "That is in the record now." He had said, "This court is adjourned." Charlene Dupree had called the school on the Thursday after the hearing. She had asked to speak with the principal. The principal, a woman named Dr. Sandra Hawkins, who had been at Pinehurst for 8 years, and who had handled the aftermath of the incident with the specific, careful attention of a principal who understands that the institution she runs has an obligation to the families it serves, had taken the call. Charlene Dupree had said, "I understand that what I did caused a problem for a child and her grandfather. I did not know the authorized pickup records existed, or I would have gone to you first. I want to apologize to the family if that is possible." Dr. Hawkins had said, "I will pass that along." She had passed it along to Naomi. Naomi had thought about it for 3 days. She had said to Cornelius she wants to apologize. Cornelius had said, "What do you want to do?" Naomi had said, "I want to understand whether she is apologizing for the specific assumption or for the outcome. Those are different apologies." He had said, "That is a reasonable distinction." She had said, "I am going to write her a letter." She had written a letter. The letter had said, "I accept your apology for the outcome. I want you to know what the specific assumption was. You watched a black man you did not recognize and a black child you did not recognize get into a car together at a school pickup line, and the most available explanation you found was that something was wrong. The most available explanation was that this was an ordinary pickup." The child approached the car. The car was familiar to her. The pickup was authorized. I want you to understand the distance between those 2 explanations and what it costs when the wrong one is chosen first. Charlene Dupree had written back. Her letter had said, "I read your letter 3 times. I did not have a good answer to the question you asked. I have been thinking about what a good answer would look like. I do not have one yet. I am sorry for what my call cost your family." Naomi had read the letter. She had not responded. She had put it in the same folder as the hearing transcript and the settlement documents and the 30-day protocol that the Greenwood Police Department had submitted to the court. The remedial phase produced a settlement, 3 months later, a formal written apology from the Greenwood Police Department. The implementation of the 30-day protocol, the court had ordered a departmental review of all custodial dispute stop procedures from the prior 3 years, and a financial settlement that Cornelius and Naomi had agreed between the two of them to use in a specific way. One portion for Amara's education account, one portion for a scholarship fund at Carver Middle School in the name of Earl Whitfield, who had worked the compress for 11 years and had died of it, and whose name had never been in a record that said he deserved it. Evelyn had been the one who suggested the scholarship. She had said the evening after they agreed on the settlement allocation, "The education account is right, and I want the other portion to be in the record in a way that your father's name is in it. Not in a lawsuit, in an award, in a student who does something with it." Cornelius had said at Carver. She had said at Carver, in his name, for a science student. He had said the selection criterion should be the thing he taught me. She had said, "What did he teach you?" He had said, "He taught me to go where the work is and stay there." She had said then, "The criterion is the student who goes where the evidence leads, even when it is inconvenient." He had said yes. She had said, "I will contact the district." She had contacted the district the following Monday. The district had established the Earl Whitfield Scholarship Fund at Carver Middle School within 6 weeks. The first scholarship was to be awarded in the spring to a 6th-grade science student selected by a committee of 3 Cornelius, Evelyn, and Dr. Hawkins from Pinehurst, who had asked to be involved because she had been affected by the incident in ways she had not entirely articulated, but that she was determined to act on. The courtroom had been quiet for a moment after the judge's last words. Then Amara had said in the quiet in the voice she used when she was not sure whether she was allowed to speak Papa. Cornelius had said yes. She had said, "Can I come to you now?" He had looked at Theodora. Theodora had said yes. He had gone to where Amara was sitting, and she had come off the chair and had taken his hand, and they had stood in the courtroom with the judge's words still in the air, and the record still in the transcript that the court reporter was transcribing word by word into the document that was going to hold the findings. The document was going to hold no articulable basis for physical contact before documentation review. Procedural violation of department's own protocol. 2 hours and 17 minutes. Child separated from authorized guardian. Documentation offered and not reviewed. It was also going to hold, she pointed across the room without hesitating and called his name. Cornelius had stood in the courtroom with Amara's hand in his and had thought, "That is what the record says now. That is what it is going to say." In the hallway outside the courtroom, Theodora had said to Cornelius, "That is the most complete finding I have received in 19 years. The record will hold it." Naomi had been holding Amara's hand. She had said what happens now. Theodora had said, "Now we move to the remedial phase. The court will schedule it. In the meantime, the department has 30 days to submit the protocol. I will review the protocol when it comes." Cornelius had said, "What if the protocol is insufficient?" She had said then, "I will tell the court it is insufficient, and the court will require a revision." He had said, "And if the revision is insufficient?" She had said, "We keep going until it is sufficient." That is the process. It is slow, and it is sometimes maddening, and it is the process. He had said yes. She had said, "You did everything correctly, Mr. Whitfield. In the car, at the station, in the filing, in this hearing. The record is as complete as we could make it." He had said, "My father worked the compress for 11 years. His name was never in any record that said he deserved better than what he got. The scholarship is going to have his name in it. A student from Carver Middle School is going to carry it." She had said yes. He had said that is the record he should have had. She had said yes. It is. They had walked out of the courthouse. Amara had said on the steps, "Papa, are we done?" He had said yes. "We are done." She had said, "Did the record say what you said it would say?" He had said yes. "It said you were right and I was coming back." She had said, "I knew it would." They had gotten in the car. Cornelius had driven home. The scholarship was awarded for the first time the following spring. Cornelius had sat on the selection committee with Evelyn and Dr. Hawkins. They had read 14 applications over 2 evenings at the Willow Street kitchen table. The applications were 1 page each, answering 3 questions. What scientific concept do you find most interesting and why? Describe a time when you discovered that your hypothesis was wrong. What do you want to do with what you learn? Cornelius had read all 14. He had said to Evelyn and Dr. Hawkins at the beginning of the second evening, "I am not looking for the student who has the most knowledge. I am looking for the student who knows how to be wrong correctly." Dr. Hawkins had said, "What does that look like in a 12-year-old's application?" He had said it looks like a student who describes the moment when the evidence went somewhere unexpected, and who did not retreat from the evidence, who stayed with it. They had gone through the applications. They had reached the 11th. Evelyn had said, "Read this one aloud." He had read it. The student was a girl named Destiny from the south part of Greenwood, from the same neighborhood where Cornelius's mother had cleaned houses from the same streets he had walked to school 40 years earlier. She had done her science project on the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies, and had in the first question described the monarch's relationship to the specific trees they returned to across generations. The butterflies that arrive in Mexico in October were born in Canada in August. They have never been to Mexico. They have never been to the specific trees. But they find the trees. In the conclusion section, Destiny had written, "I thought the butterflies had a map. I found out they do not have a map. They have something inside them that responds to specific conditions, the temperature, the light, the magnetic field, and those conditions lead them to the place without a map. The place is in them in a way that the route is not. I think that is the most interesting thing I have learned in 6th grade, that you can arrive at the right place without having been given the directions." Cornelius had read the conclusion 3 times. He had said this one. Evelyn had said yes. Dr. Hawkins had said yes. They had agreed. Destiny had received the Earl Whitfield Scholarship at the Carver Middle School end-of-year ceremony in May. The ceremony was held in the school auditorium, which had been the same auditorium where Cornelius had taught for 31 years, and which had over those 31 years seen the same ceremony with different students in the same seats, the same principal at the same podium, the same specific quality of a school event that is simultaneously exactly like all previous versions of itself, and unique because the people in it are different people every time. Destiny had come up to receive the scholarship check, $450, enough to cover books and fees for her first semester at whichever high school she was going to attend. And Cornelius had shaken her hand. She had said, "Mr. Whitfield, I read about the scholarship, about your father." He had said, "What did you read?" She had said that he worked at the compress, that he died at 52, that his name was not in any record that said he deserved better. He had said, "Where did you read that?" She had said, "Mrs. Whitfield told us when she came to do the collection presentation in the spring. She brought the compress employment roster. She showed us where his name was." He had said yes. She had said, "I think that is why I wanted to do the monarchs. Because they go somewhere they have never been, and they find the right trees. And the trees are the record that the previous monarchs left." Cornelius had looked at her. He had said yes. That is exactly what it is. He had thought, driving home from the ceremony with Evelyn in the passenger seat, she will go somewhere she has not been. She will find her way to the right place, because the direction is already in her. That is what the scholarship is for. That is what my father's compress work was for. That is the chain. Theodora had called Cornelius on the 29th day. She had said, "The protocol is more complete than I expected. It requires, when an officer does not review offered documentation before applying physical restraint, that the officer document the specific safety concern that justified not reviewing it. Not a general concern, a specific one in the incident report." Cornelius had said so. The gap has to be explained. She had said yes. If there is no specific safety concern, the incident report shows the gap, and the gap can be used in subsequent proceedings. He had said the record requires the reason. She had said yes. He had said that is the thing. She had said yes. It is not enough, but it is the most that this process produces, and it is more than was there before. He had said, "I know." He had driven Amara to school that Thursday, 3:15, the green Buick at the curb. He had said, "How was school?" She had said, "We did butterflies." He had said, "What did you learn about butterflies?" She had said, "They go far away, but they remember." He had said, "That is exactly right." She had said, "Like frogs." He had said, "Like frogs." She had said, "Papa, do you always remember?" He had looked at her in the rearview mirror. He had said, "I remember everything that matters." She had said, "What matters?" He had said, "You, your mother, your grandmother. What I am supposed to do and when I am supposed to do it." She had said, "And the frogs." He had said, "And the frogs." She had looked out the window. The Buick had moved down the street past the school where he had taught for 31 years, past the church where he and Evelyn had been married in 1986, past the Compress building that had been converted to a storage facility and that still stood on the south side of town, the way that buildings stand when they do not know that someone is supposed to remember what happened in them. He remembered. He drove down the street. 3 blocks from the school there was no cruiser at the side street. There was just the green Buick and the old man who drove it and the girl in the back seat and the Tuesday afternoon light coming through the windows and the record that had been corrected, and that was going to keep being corrected as long as there was someone willing to make the correction. He pulled up to the house. Evelyn was on the porch. She had seen them coming. She was already standing. Amara said, "Grandma." Evelyn said, "Come here." Amara ran. Cornelius sat in the car for a moment. He looked at the house where he had lived for 36 years. He looked at the porch where Evelyn was standing with her arms around Amara. He thought the evidence leads where it leads. You follow it. You go where it goes, even when it goes somewhere inconvenient, even when it goes somewhere that costs you something. He thought the cost was 2 hours and 17 minutes and a 6-year-old sitting in a room asking for Papa. He thought the record now says what it should say. He got out of the car. He went up the porch steps. Evelyn looked at him. She said, "You are late." He said, "I know." She said she told me about the butterflies on the drive home. He said, "Yes." She said they go somewhere they have never been and they find the right trees because the trees are in them. He said, "Yes." Evelyn looked at him the way she had been looking at him for 37 years, the specific way of someone who knows the full account and does not need the summary. She said, "Come inside." He said, "Yes." She said, "Dinner is ready." He said, "Good." She said, "Naomi called. She is coming for dinner." He said, "Good." She said, "Cornelius." He said, "Yes." She said, "Your father would have been glad about the scholarship." He had been quiet. He had said, "Yes, he would have been." She said, "The record has his name in it now." He said, "Yes, it does." She said, "Come inside." He went inside. The door closed. The record was complete. It was in the court filing, and in the settlement, and in the scholarship in Earl Whitfield's name, and in the protocol that the Greenwood Police Department had submitted to the court, and in the new protocol at Pinehurst Elementary that required authorized pickup verification before any law enforcement call, and in the 8 applications that had not been selected, and in the 1 application that had, and in the conclusion that Destiny had written. You can arrive at the right place without having been given the directions. It was also in the notebook by the chair in the living room where Cornelius had written down the 3 things Amara had said in the 6 weeks between the filing and the hearing. He had not crossed them out after the hearing. He had left them. They were part of the record, too. The record was complete. It was in the court filing, and in the settlement, and in the scholarship in Earl Whitfield's name, and in the protocol that the Greenwood Police Department had submitted within 30 days, which had been reviewed by the court and had been accepted, and which was now in the written documentation that governed how custodial dispute calls were handled in Lafleur County. It was also in the notebook by the chair in the living room where Cornelius had written down the 3 things Amara had said in the 6 weeks between the filing and the hearing. He had not crossed them out after the hearing. He had left them. They were part of the record, too. She called him Papa, the way children call a name that has always been there. It was still there. It was in the car on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3:15 at the curb outside Pinehurst Elementary. It was in the notebook by the chair in the living room where the 3 things she had said were written in the specific, cramped handwriting of a man who has been taking notes for 31 years and who does not stop. It was in the scholarship fund in Earl Whitfield's name at the school where Cornelius had taught for 31 years. It was in the court record in the judge's specific words. She pointed across the room without hesitating and called his name. That is in the record now. It was in the protocol, the 8-page protocol that required a specific safety concern to be documented before the gap could be justified, the protocol that made the gap visible, the protocol that was in the Greenwood Police Department's files and in the court's records, and in the training session that every officer in the department was required to complete. It was in the Destiny's essay in the sentence, "You can arrive at the right place without having been given the directions." It was in the Compress building that still stood on the south side of town where Earl Whitfield had worked for 11 years, and where the cotton dust had taken its slow accounting. It was in Evelyn's collection at the county library in the Compress employment roster from 1962, where Earl Whitfield's name was in the record that said he had been there, that he had done the work, that the work had been done. It was in the house on Willow Street where the porch was, and where Evelyn was standing, and where dinner was ready, and where Naomi was coming. It was going to keep being there. That was the whole point. That was always the whole point. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, the green Buick was at the curb at 3:15. The school had the authorized pickup record in its system. The record had Cornelius's name and photograph and relationship designation and the days of the week. The new protocol required the secretary to verify the record before calling anyone. The record was there to be verified. The verification took 60 seconds. Amara came out of the school with her backpack and her worksheet and whatever question she had been thinking about since Mrs. Fraser had said something that she did not yet fully understand. Cornelius was at the curb. She got in. He said, "How was school?" She told him. He listened to the full answer. He had learned over 14 months of pickups, and then another year, and some after the incident, that the listening was the most important part. Not the question which he could ask in 3 words, but the listening which required that he not fill the silence and not redirect the account and not summarize before she was finished. He had learned this from 31 years of teaching. The student's answer is often not finished when it sounds finished. The next thing is still forming. You wait for the next thing. He asked the next question. She gave him that answer too. By the time they reached the house on Willow Street, there had been at least 3 questions and 3 full answers, and usually the last answer had led to a 4th question that neither of them finished before the car was parked and Evelyn was on the porch or Naomi was at the door. That was the Tuesday and Thursday schedule. That was what retirement looked like. They drove home. The Compress building was still on the south side of town. Earl Whitfield's name was in the collection at the county library in the Compress employment roster from 1962. The collection was there. The name was in it. The scholarship was at Carver in Earl's name. And Destiny was at her new school with the books the scholarship had bought and the sentence in her essay that was also in the record. You can arrive at the right place without having been given the directions. The record was complete. It was continuing. The shoebox in the second bedroom had Lottie Mae's letters in it, 47 of them over 4 years, each one closing with the same sentence, "You are doing what your father paid for. Do not waste it." He had not wasted it. He was still not wasting it. That was what it was for. That was the chain. That was the record doing what the record does. Holding what is put in it, being found by the people who know where to look, saying what happened and to whom and when and what came after until the person who comes next can arrive at the right place, even though they have never been there because the place is in them in a way that the route is not.